now and head over to our YouTube live stream that we have shared in the chat. If you want to ask a question, we ask that you use the raise your hand function to be added to the queue, or feel free to drop a question in the chat and I'm happy to ask your question for you. Just a reminder too, to please mute your audio when you're not asking a question or when you're done asking a question. We will take one question at a time. If you'd like to ask a follow-up question, we'll take it when everyone has had a chance to get their question out. And then again, if you'd like a recording of this media briefing, the link for the YouTube live stream will become the link for the recording when this briefing is complete. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Scholes of Oregon Department of Agriculture to kick us off. Dr. Scholes.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Jonathan. So once again, my name is Ryan Scholes. I'm a state veterinarian with the Oregon Department of Agriculture. And we're here to talk today about this case in Crook County, which originally was reported to our office last week due to some mortality that was being experienced in some poultry on this property. Oregon Department of Agriculture, along with the United States Department of Agriculture, were able to respond to the farm right away that same day, collected samples on the poultry as well as a couple of pigs on the farm, and delivered those samples to the Oregon State University, Oregon Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory, who were able to test those and get us results by the next day, confirming that the poultry were infected with highly pathogenic avian influenza, and there was also signs that the pigs may have also been exposed and be infected with that same virus. So a team comprised of both ODA veterinarians as well as staff and veterinarians from the USDA, APHIS Veterinary Services and APHIS Wildlife Services responded to the farm on Friday, humanely euthanized the poultry as well as the 3 pigs that had tested positive, and sampled 2 additional pigs that were previously unknown on the farm. Those animals were delivered again to the Oregon State University, Oregon Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory, where the pathologist there worked through the night to collect samples and conduct further testing that did eventually confirm that those pigs were systemically infected with avian influenza virus. Those samples were forwarded over the weekend to the United States Department of Agriculture's National Veterinary Services Laboratory, where those samples were confirmed by the national lab and were announced today as being the first case of highly pathogenic avian influenza to be confirmed in a pig in the U.S. I want to really highlight the fact that this case is a really good example of our One Health approach, combining the animal side, the lab, and Oregon Health Authority on the human side to respond quickly to these reports and to effectively control and mitigate any risks posed by those infections in animals. And all of the susceptible poultry that were infected and the pigs were humanely euthanized and incinerated by the Oregon State University Veterinary School, and to reduce any risk and remove any risk from that farm. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Stedlinger to take over for the human side of that One Health response.
Thanks, Dr. Scholes. I will say I'm happy to be here. Since 2022, the Oregon Health Authority has partnered with the Oregon Department of Agriculture through a One Health approach that Dr. Scholes mentioned. That is, we investigate human exposures to animal outbreaks of avian influenza. One Health is an integrated, unified approach to balance and optimize the health of people, animals, as well as our environment. And it encourages these collaborative efforts of many experts, like our disease detectives or epidemiologists, laboratorians in our public health labs and veterinary labs, physicians and veterinarians. These are people who work at the Oregon Health Authority, the Oregon Department of Agriculture, the Oregon State University, as well as our local public health authorities. We work together to improve the health of people and animals, including pets, livestock, and wildlife. To date, there have been 40 outbreaks of H5 in backyard and commercial poultry in Oregon that have resulted in 127 individuals being exposed to avian influenza. There have been no human H5N1 infections associated with outbreaks in Oregon to date, no infections among people living in Oregon, and no evidence of human-to-human transmission. With that, we can say that the risk of avian influenza to the general public remains low. People with close, prolonged, unprotected exposures to infected birds or other animals, including livestock, or to environments contaminated by infected birds or other animals, are at increased risk of infection. However, the risk remains low even in those settings when appropriate personal protective equipment or PPE is used. When animal outbreaks of H5N1 occur, the Oregon Health Authority works with local health departments to monitor people who have been exposed to sick animals for symptoms of disease, such as runny nose, red eyes, cough, and fever. If symptoms develop, people are tested for influenza and treated with oseltamivir to reduce the risk of complications should they become infected with H5N1 avian influenza. To reduce the risk of H5N1 bird flu, people should avoid contact with sick or dead birds or animals or their droppings or litter, and should not drink unpasteurized or raw dairy products such as milk or cheese. With that, Jonathan, I think Dr. Scholes and I are ready to take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Seidlinger. Thank you, Dr. Scholes. Our first question comes from Helen Branswell with Stat News. Go ahead, Helen.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great, thank you. A couple of questions, if I could please. Dr. Scholes, you said 3 pigs tested positive. The result, or the press release today said 1. Were there 3?
There were 3 pigs that were tested. 1 pig was confirmed after necropsy as being infected.
And when you say it was confirmed after necropsy, what did you see? Was there, evident infection in the lungs, in the brain? What exactly did the necropsy tell you?
During that necropsy, the pathologist collected a number of different tissue samples from throughout the pig's body, and there were multiple different sampling sites where those tissues were tested PCR positive for the influenza virus, confirming the presence of virus in those tissues.
Okay, so this was not a case where the pig just had viral contamination in the nose. This was an actual infection, correct? And do you know the genotype and clade of the virus? Has USDA shared that information with you?
We know that it is the H5N1 2.3.4.4b highly pathogenic avian influenza virus. It is a wild bird strain of that virus. It is not associated with the dairy strain that we've been seeing in other states.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Next question comes from Leah Douglas with Reuters. Go ahead, Leah.
Hi, thanks so much. I was curious about, you mentioned there were signs of infection in the pigs. What were those when you arrived on the farm that indicated they might have contracted the virus? Thanks.
So there was evidence that they may have been exposed. The signs of infection were from the testing that was done. So the pigs had been exposed. The owners had reported some history that indicated they may have had a significant exposure to the virus through the ducts. And so they were sampled. That initial sample was what gave us indication that they may have been infected.
Thank you, Leah. Next question comes from Alejandro Figueroa from Oregon Public Broadcasting. Go ahead, Alejandro.
Hey, I kind of have a couple questions. I'm curious if, whether that's ODA or the State Health Authority is sending any guidance to local health departments. And I'm just curious what role some of these health departments are serving in detecting this virus, at least on the human side.
Thank you, Alejandro, for that question. I will say, this situation was identified first by the owners who reported sick birds to the Oregon Department of Agriculture, and that's how these cases are usually identified. The public health gets involved if individuals are reporting symptoms or if it's a commercial activity or there's something unusual. Our local public health authorities, the county, usually public health department, is usually on the ground in those situations to assess the individuals, to assess if testing is done, and to assess whether individuals need medication. So that's the typical process, and our local public health authorities, in this case, were a great participant from Crook County in responding with the Oregon Department of Agriculture to this situation. We have sent numerous health alerts from our federal partners about the spread of H5N1 amongst birds, dairy cattle, and other species, about the potential risk to humans, with about 36, I think, individuals across the United States who've tested positive for an H5N1, all but one following exposure to animals. And we continue in communication with our local public health authorities on the situation in Crook County and other updates from the Oregon Department of Agriculture as birds, whether backyard bird flocks or commercial birds, become sick, so that they can be updated of the current situation in Oregon and how to respond to questions from constituents.
Good. Thanks for that. Dr. Scholes, this other question is about the virus itself and spreading around in Oregon. I mean, there's been at least, I think at this point, at least one commercial facility that was confirmed last week by ODA or the USDA Laboratory Services, and another backyard flock. Is this just coincidence that there are these animals that are testing positive for this virus right now, or is there like a new wave or a resurgence of this virus, at least here in the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, great question. So we sent out 2 alerts last week, one for that commercial case. The second one was this case. So this case was previously announced in the poultry when we had the original poultry that tested positive. It's a little bit of, I think, both on your question, a little bit of coincidence and a little bit of a seasonal flow. So this virus is naturally present in wild waterfowl. They serve as a reservoir for this virus. So anytime we see concentrations of wild waterfowl moving through our state, particularly in the fall and then again in the spring during migratory season, the risk of exposure of domestic poultry to this virus through intermingling with wild waterfowl, which is what we believed happened on this farm, that risk is much higher. So we do tend to see a concentration of these spillover cases, especially here in Oregon in the fall, but then again in the spring as well during the migratory season.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks, Alejandro. Next question comes from Lynn Terry of Oregon Capital Chronicle. Go ahead, Lynn.
Hi. Having trouble with can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Just one simple question. How many people on this farm might have been exposed? It's a small farm, 2 owners and workers, or what? What's the number?
Lynn, thanks for that question. I don't want to give you the actual number. It was a very small number of individuals on this farm. This was not a commercial operation or an operation that was preparing food for sale. Small number of individuals that public health was able to follow up on.
Okay, so another question maybe for both of you, kind of more general. This is the first case in pigs. It's, spread amongst species. I mean, the fact that it's spreading amongst species, what does this say about the virus? Like, it's just really crazily mutating, and, is there a chance that it could get, pose more of a threat to humans? Just to kind of want to step back, how threatening this virus might be, and the fact that it's infecting more species, what that means.
Since I'm unmuted, I'll start and then see if Dr. Scholes has anything to add. I think, we've been seeing detections of H5N1 initially in wild birds for several years now. And we've seen different avian species being infected. We've seen various mammalian species being infected, from seals to sea lions to dairy cattle this year. And now we're announcing a pig that's been infected. There have been some other species along the way. During monitoring of this virus, we've not seen huge mutations that would indicate that the virus is becoming more easily spread. We've not seen indications that the virus has mutations that could cause more serious illness amongst humans. And we've not seen any documented evidence of human-to-human transmission. But I think all those reasons, those possibilities that we could see mutations are why you see the Oregon Department of Agriculture and the Oregon Health Authority here today talking together about this case of a H5N1 detection in a pig, because we do worry about changes in this virus. So these viruses are sequenced and examined for potential changes that could cause more serious problems. And we want to monitor how these spillover events or potential spillover events happen to see if there's something more worrisome that we need to change our guidance to farmers or people who are raising animals about how they need to take precautions, or to the broader general public. So that's why it's a coordinated approach with those of us, here, our staff, the laboratorians, and our federal partners, our local partners, to ensure that we're trying to stay up to date on this. I will make one small comment about pigs, because people may hear pigs and think this 2009 H1N1 outbreak. We worry a little bit more about pigs because pigs are susceptible to bird flu or avian viruses as well as human viruses. And so we worry that a pig could potentially be co-infected, and then we could see some intermingling of those viruses, which is why additional studies are being done. But the initial results that have come back have not shown that at all, that this is a wild-type avian influenza virus that did infect this pig. Dr. Schultz, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think I would just echo a little bit that, that concern that maybe this virus could end up mutating at some point, end up circulating more, end up in new species, I think is a lot why we take it as seriously as we do, and why we were so quick to get out to this farm, so quick to sample these pigs, even though they weren't sick, they were healthy, because we recognize that risk. And that's a lot of what this One Health partnership is about. It's about finding this virus, making sure that animal owners know how to protect their animals, but then when something does happen, where to turn to get help, be able to provide that help to detect the virus and control it quickly before it has a chance to mutate and to spread into other species.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Lynn. Our next question comes from Suzanne Rust of LA Times. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Hey, good afternoon. Two sort of just like quick questions, and I'm sorry if I didn't read this, if it's in there. But were there any other animals on the farm that were infected? Any other species, or that look sick?
So the reason we were originally out there was because of sick and dying ducks and geese. There were some guinea fowl, so several other poultry species.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'm sorry. I knew about the poultry species, but thank you for telling me what kinds. I was just curious. Anything like donkeys, goats, anything like that there?
So there's no other animals that are showing any evidence of infections. There are other species on the farm that are being closely monitored and that farm will remain under quarantine and under monitoring for several months now. And we will continue monitoring those animals for any signs of infection. At this point in time, there's no evidence of inspection in any of those other species.
Okay, and then my next question is, I did read this, that I think 70 birds were euthanized, but when I looked at the USDA website, it says something about a backyard flock being infected, and they said 180 animals on that site. Is that two different farms, or is there a miscount? Just what's the discrepancy there?
Have to see those numbers. So it is not another farm. This happens. It's not uncommon for there to be discrepancies in that. Our numbers are often off of the initial owner report. USDA is the one that gets the paperwork afterwards of exactly how many animals are being indemnified on the farm. And so sometimes there can be discrepancies in that, in terms of how many animals are actually euthanized and how many animals are actually there and how many animals the owner thought they had when they called us initially.
All right, excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Next question comes from Heather Roberts with Oregon Radio News Network. Go ahead, Heather.
Thank you. I'm just wanting to clarify this. Crook County is a known agricultural, more rural community. This seems to indicate we have wild birds moving through that are that have been infected, is there any other monitoring happening to adjacent properties or any other properties in Crook County to make sure that other wild birds haven't inadvertently infected other properties that we just don't know about yet?
So, the monitoring that is done after these cases is somewhat dictated by the type of poultry operation. Because this wasn't a commercial operation, we don't go door to door to do active testing. We do increase outreach in areas. We do do passive monitoring through some different surveillance mechanisms. I would say, though, that there's indication that there are infected waterfowl passing through just about every county in our state right now. And so that's part of the reason why we don't really focus on just this area, because there isn't any evidence of spillover off of this farm from this particular infection. And we do know that there are waterfowl flying throughout the whole state. And, you know, a flock of geese can be in one county today and 5 counties away by tomorrow. And so we really try to target what limited manpower we have to cover the whole state and be able to effectively respond to potential reports of illness or disease anywhere in the state when they come in.
Thank you, Heather. Next question comes from Julie Steenhuisen with Reuters. Go ahead, Julie.
Thank you. Yeah, so I wanted to clarify the testing of the pigs. So 3 pigs were tested. Were all 3 pigs exposed, or is there any indication that they could have transmitted the virus to each other? I'm just trying to really understand, you know, what were the signs and how, you know, and what is the suspicion there, and also then about the humans. You know, that they're. Are you actually testing the people on the farm for H5 to see if have been exposed?
I can start with the pig side of that, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Seidlinger for the human side of it. So on the pigs, the process, there's been a number of different tests that have occurred today, or to date, sorry, on those pigs. So when we initially responded to the farm, our typical process is to collect pooled samples. It allows us to quickly collect an overview of the disease status on the farm. So there was a number of pooled samples, so samples that were pooled together from multiple animals. That were collected. There was a pooled sample that was collected between the 3 pigs. So each of the 3 pigs were swabbed, were placed into a single tube. That tube was positive, indicating that there was virus present in the mouths of those pigs. It was an oral swab that was collected. And so at that point, when we responded to the farm later in the week, we euthanized those pigs. Those pigs were each individually necropsied, and one of those pigs was found to have virus throughout their body. That was later confirmed by the National Veterinary Services Laboratory. But with all that initial testing happening at the OSU Veterinary Diagnostic Lab.
So I'll weigh in a little on the human testing and aspects. I will say that our standard approach was followed in this case, where public health will accompany Oregon Department of Agriculture if there's a commercial outbreak or if there are any humans showing symptoms, and then we'll assess if people need to be tested and or provided antiviral medication. I think in order to protect individuals in this case, I can't tell you, how many were tested and received oseltamivir, but I can say that including in this outbreak, we have had no known cases of H5N1 in Oregon residents and people living in Oregon, and that continues after this joint response to this case. So the disease that we've seen in this outbreak is really amongst those waterfowl and now this pig, but no human cases.
Thank you, Julie. Next question is from Kyle Odegaard from Capital Press. Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, I was just wondering, first off, if there have been confirmation of pigs with avian influenza in other countries, such as Canada or in Europe. And then secondly, I was also wondering whether outdoor pets such as cats or dogs at farms would be, if you guys would be concerned with those animals contracting the virus.
Thank you. Great question, Kyle. On your first question about whether it's been confirmed in pigs in other countries, honestly, I don't know that I can answer that for this specific strain throughout the rest of the world. I'll have to look into that and get back to you on that one. In terms of other animals, would you be able to, sorry, I focused so much on the first half of that question. I know you were asking about risk to other animals.
I was mainly thinking about, common pets that are on farms, such as cats and dogs, that people actually would be inclined to have close contact with.
Yeah, so there have been cases across the country where particularly cats have been infected, especially associated with a lot of the dairy cases in other states. And there have been a spattering of other domestic species. In almost all of those, or really all of them where we can trace back an origin, it's generally associated with ingesting infected food material, similar to a lot of the wild mammal cases as well. A lot of the cats on dairies, it's suspected to be connected with drinking raw milk on the dairy that may be fed to them or they may have access to, or consuming infected birds or something along those lines. That's part of why we respond so quickly and collect all of those, any birds that have died up to that point, and euthanize the rest of them so that there aren't birds dying and remaining on the property that could potentially expose other animals to the virus.
Thank you. I just want to weigh in a little more and say that this is part of the conversations that the Department of Agriculture and Public Health have with individuals about how to protect themselves, but also, other animals in trying to separate sick animals from well animals and reporting sick animals to the Department of Agriculture so that we collectively can investigate. And just want to reiterate to folks that, the food supply, the meat and eggs, the poultry that you buy in the grocery store is safe. The pasteurized milk that you buy in the store is safe. But the situation that we're seeing with cats and exposure to raw milk on dairy farms, I think, is another reason that we reiterate the advice not to drink unpasteurized milk, because in addition to the potential for H5N1 for yourself or pets, the risk of other infections is great. And so sticking to, the pasteurized milk is a way to help protect yourself and your pets, as well as these other steps of reporting sick animals to the Department of Agriculture so that Public Health and Agriculture can investigate.
Thank you, Kyle. Next question, a follow-up question from Helen Branswell with Stat News. Go ahead, Helen.
Thank you very much. This is for Dr. Schultz. You mentioned the 3 cats being tested initially in a pool and then the necropsy showing what they showed. The USDA's press release talked about 5 cats. Why were not cats, I'm sorry, pigs. I got confused by the cat thing there for a second. Pigs. Why were the other 2 pigs not pooled in with the first 3? And there are 5 pigs in total, are there not?
Yeah, great question. I'm glad you caught yourself. I was beginning to worry there that I had been saying cats all along. So yes, pigs. so there were 5 pigs on the farm. So 3 of those were larger pigs that were co-housed with the waterfowl that were allowed kind of free-range access around the farm and around the pond where the waterfowl were present. They were the ones that we initially sampled because we were concerned that there may have been an exposure that occurred. There were 2 additional very small teacup mini pigs that were also on the farm in a different area in an enclosure that we weren't aware of during the initial site visit to collect samples. Those were sampled when we returned on Friday. We collected nasal and oral swabs on those pigs. At least one of those pigs showed signs of virus in that swab, and so those were eventually euthanized as well. And the tissues on those are being tested and have not yet been confirmed by NBSL whether there's any virus or not.
Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
I have a follow-up question from Alejandro with OPB. Go ahead, Alejandro. Alejandro with OPB. Go ahead. Not hearing from Alejandro. Just a reminder that if you want to ask a question, please use the raise your hand function at the bottom of the page to be added to the queue. And also feel free to drop a question in the chat, and I'm happy to ask your question for you. We'll get back to Alejandro, but let's go back to Julie Steenhuisen with Reuters. Go ahead, Julie.
I'm just trying to fully understand the testing of the pigs, and I'm sorry to keep going over this, but I'm confused. So we have one pig that has conclusively tested positive. You've done necropsies on the two others, and are you awaiting test results on those? And then we have two teacup pigs, and one of those also tested positive. Or are the positives, can you just account for where we stand with the testing of all the pigs so that my mind doesn't explode? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that it's really, maybe to back up a bit. So there's kind of two levels of testing that has occurred. One is those swabs that has been done, that there may be virus present there. That has been done on all 5 pigs. So there was a pooled sample done on the 3 larger free-roaming pigs, and then that was confirmed to have virus present. Those 3 pigs were all 3 euthanized, taken to the Oregon Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, immediately necropsied, and tissues from all 3 of those pigs were tested, with one of them being confirmed as having systemic infection. Subsequently, the 2 additional teacup minis were swabbed. There was indication that there was virus present in at least one of them in the nose or mouth, and that those 2 pigs were subsequently euthanized or have been necropsied. We are awaiting final results on those tissue samples on those pigs.
Okay, so the test results that we're waiting for are the 2 teacup pigs, yeah?
Correct.
Okay, and so the necropsies on the 2 other free-roaming pigs, the large pigs, those showed no systemic infection. Is that right, in the necropsy?
There was no virus confirmed by NVSL in the tissue samples of those pigs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, just a quick follow-up on that last question. When you say in the teacups that at least one, is that because they were pooled, the swabs there were pooled as well, so you don't know if you're seeing 2 positives or 1 positive in that case?
No, those ones were individual swabs. We did have 1 confirmed positive.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. And thank you, Julie, for your previous question. Alejandro's mic is not working for him right now, so I will ask his question, and that is, was whether any farm has requested PPE available through ODA, and how fast ODA is able to fulfill that request.
Yes, we have had requests. I think our commercial avian influenza case is a great example of that. So we partnered with Oregon Health Authority early on in the national dairy outbreak. Keeping in mind, we have not had any dairy farms confirmed positive for this virus in the state of Oregon. But we developed a PPE stockpile that is available to farms. But we also provide that PPE directly in disease cases. So in this Crook County case, when we initially responded to test animals, we provided them with a kit of PPE. When we confirmed the case, we shipped them additional PPE. Similarly with the commercial case, when in Clackamas County, we provided that farm the first morning with a pallet of PPE that was staged with us by Oregon Health Authority to ensure that all of those employees have proper PPE as well.
Thank you, Alejandro. At this time, we do not have any additional questions. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, Lynn, I missed your hand up there. Lynn Terry, Oregon Capital Chronicle, has a follow-up question. Go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah. Hey, thanks. I'm just wondering if there's tests pending on the people on the farm. You said in the release that they're being monitored, but so I assume that means they don't have any symptoms, but have they been tested?
I have no pending tests from this situation, and I can say that we have no evidence of infection in humans, and we continue to have no human cases who reside in Oregon.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Lynn. We have a follow-up question from Suzanne Rust with LA Times. Go ahead, Suzanne.
I'm sorry, so you said there were no pending tests. Does that mean you did not test them, just to be clear? The people.
Yeah, I'm not going to say how many or if we did any tests or provided treatment, that we responded per our protocol and assessed individuals, and that we have no cases of H5N1, including associated with this outbreak in Oregon.
Thanks for that question. Follow-up question from Helen at Stat News. Go ahead, Helen.
Thank you. Dr. Schultz, the two groups of pigs, is there any possibility that they had interaction with one another? What I'm wondering about is, you clearly have one pig that was infected and a teacup pig that had virus, at least in its, upper respiratory passages. Is there a possibility that the virus passed from one pig to another there, or were they completely separate on the farm?
So it's hard to say with absolute definitive, as you're well aware, and nothing in science is hardly ever definitive. But the three pigs were allowed to roam the property. At least one of them was small enough they could fit through and under all of the fences. That being said, though, the teacup mini pigs were co-housed with chickens inside of a chicken coop. And by the time while we were out there on the first day to sample, those chickens were healthy. By the time we returned to euthanize the animals, some of the chickens had become infected with avian influenza and were dying. So while it could be possible that there was some exposure, the indications seem to be that there was also a very high likelihood of environmental contamination in the nose and or mouth from the environment that those teacup mini pigs were living in.
Great, thanks. And will you guys be releasing the results of the necropsy as soon as you get them, please?
I do not know an answer to that, but I can certainly pass that on to our communications director.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. I'm not seeing any other questions here or hands raised for questions. So I will send it back to Dr. Scholes to close us out.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. And thank you everyone for the questions and for joining us today. I think the really big things just to kind of highlight in closing are that this really was a I think shining example of One Health in work. We've had amazing partnerships with Oregon Health Authority, and we've really had some amazing partnerships with the Oregon State University Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, as well as my team and our USDA partners. It was a lot of late nights. It was a lot of long days for everyone involved. The pathologists at OSU that received these pigs after hours and still managed to necropsy them the night they arrived. The laboratory technicians that ran samples, again, received well after hours and got us results the same night. So it's just, it's really a shining example of how well that One Health partnership and the One Health planning that we've done here within the state of Oregon really works to protect the health of Oregon, people and animals in Oregon. I think the other thing I'd really highlight is that the other part of the system that worked is that our food supply is safe. These animals were not destined for the commercial food supply. None of these animals that were infected on this farm or any of the farms in Oregon that have been infected have ever entered the food supply. And our food does remain safe. Pork products remain safe. Meat products that are properly prepared remain safe. Eggs that are properly prepared, milk that's been pasteurized that you can buy at the grocery store remains safe for general consumption. And I think that's another really important point to really highlight. With that, I think I'll turn it over to Dr. Seidlinger for any last words.
Thanks, Dr. Schultz. I will say I appreciate this ongoing partnership that we've had across governments, so federal, state, and local governments in response, but also really particularly across our partnership with public health and agriculture in responding to keep people safe. As Dr. Schultz said, the food supply remains safe, and so people do not need to be concerned about the food they buy in the grocery store, the pasteurized milk that they are consuming or giving to their family. The risk to the general public is extremely low. We know that the approximately 3 dozen cases of human H5N1 that we've seen in this country have been associated with unprotected contact with animals who've been sick. Part of keeping farm workers and people who have backyard birds safe is providing them messages about what they can do, which ODA has been great at doing, and also providing them personal protective equipment that they can use. And that partnership of being able to provide PPE to ODA to distribute to farmers, to people with backyard animals, has been great because they have a way of reaching them, providing the information that public health may not, and then we stand by to respond together so that we can identify issues early, report them out to the general public, and give you messages that you can do to stay safe. And right now, that message hasn't changed based on today's announcement, and we'll continue to respond as we identify sick animals or potentially sick individuals in the future, so that we can provide that updated ongoing messaging. John?
Thank you, Dr. Seidlinger. Thank you, Dr. Scholes, and thank you everyone for joining us. Just a reminder that the recording of this media briefing is at that YouTube link that I dropped in the chat. You can also find the full job titles, excuse me, for Dr. Seidlinger and Dr. Scholes in the chat. And then finally, if you need to reach either Oregon Department of Agriculture or Oregon Health Authority communications staff, you can do so at the email addresses that I also dropped in the chat. With that, have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Hello, warm welcome to this talk. Now, something different today I want to think about. Something I've been thinking about for the past few months, and kind of feel like I know so many of you now, even though, of course, I don't personally, but I just wanted to share my thinking on this. It's about the Shroud of Turin, which is a shroud in the Cathedral of Turin in Italy. And this is so fascinating, and I've been looking at it for a few months now. It's an overlap between science, pathology, medicine, all aspects of science with history. And it's the image of a crucified man. Let me just show you it here. This is from the shroud.com site. Now, this is one of the definitive sites on the shroud. In fact, probably the definitive site on the shroud. You can see that the cloth has been damaged. It was burnt in a fire. But we'll also see the image of this man of the shroud on it. It's about 14 feet long, this artifact. Now, it is completely fascinating. If you haven't got time to watch this video, I think the evidence for this being the actual burial shroud of Jesus Christ himself is quite convincing. But, of course, I don't tell you what to think. You'll have to look at it for yourself. Why don't more people know about this? Well, John Calvin here, he was a Protestant theologian of the past, and he wrote this book saying that the relics were, the shroud particularly, was a forgery, and he was quite influential in the Protestant world, and the secular world isn't particularly interested in it. So while this has got some traction in the Catholic world, very little traction in the Protestant world, which is a great pity. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yes, a lot of these relics, so-called, were just part of a medieval racket. Of course, it was a making money thing, like selling indulgences. But there does seem to be some genuine relics as well, and the shroud seems to be one of those. Now, here's the picture that you actually see if you look at the shroud itself. This is taken from the 1978 exploration scientific investigation, and this is from the photographer Vernon Miller, available on shroudphotos.com. And this is what you actually see on the shroud, and it's a photo negative. So already I think we can probably see the head, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the moustache, the beard, marks, blood stains. These are being confirmed to be human blood on various parts from what would be we would assume to be the crown of thorns, the scourge marks that are on many parts of the body. And this is what we actually see when you look at the shroud itself. But it turns out that this is a photo negative on an original linen cloth. But the point is, linen is not a photosensitive material, and it's a negative. And of course, it's centuries before photography was developed. Photography only starts, I don't know, about 1830s or something like that. Way before that, and yet we have this photographic negative here on the shroud. Now, it wasn't known, of course, this was a negative until photography was developed. So when photography was developed, the first guy to photograph this as a positive was Seconde Pierre, French photographer, 1898, and he saw that this was, so he took a picture of the negative, and then it became a positive, and he was the first person to see it as a positive. And you can see a lot more features in the positive light. So we have this mystery already of how do we get this photo negative image on a shroud centuries before photography was even thought about, and the image is on a non-photographic sensitive material. So already it becomes really quite intriguing as to what this artifact is and who the man on the shroud is. So that's that picture there. Now, if we look at again, if we compare this is why it gets really interesting. We compare this with ancient prophecies in ancient scriptures. So this is the prophecy of Isaiah. Just as there are many who were appalled at him, his appearance was disfigured beyond that of any human being. His form was marred beyond human likeness. So what we have to remember is this is a picture of death. The man on the shroud is dead. He's in rigor mortis and is badly beaten up. That's completely unequivocal. So much pathology attests to this, some of which we'll look at. So this is an image in death is perhaps the key thing to remember, but it is consistent with ancient writings. Now, not only is there an image on the shroud, the image is actually codes, three-dimensional information. Now, in other words, the grayscale on the image contains three-dimensional information. Now, if you take a picture of yourself and put it under what's called a 3D image analyzer, it'll just be a complete mess. But when you do that with a shroud, it comes to life. And this was first done again in 1978. Now, this was done using what's called a VP8 image analyzer. It takes the original one took 8 scales of grey and transformed that into three-dimensional information. Now, this was actually developed by NASA and NASA-associated scientists to look at planets, to work out what craters went down and what hills went up, to give three-dimensional topographical information from astronomical photographs. But when they put the shroud image under that, quite a bright idea to do that, quite incredibly, it was seen to have three-dimensional information, and you get this face emerging, the face of the dead man of the shroud here emerging. And likewise, all parts of the body have this three-dimensional data on it. And again, quite